All right, everyone, welcome to our last presentation for the semester. Our topic is on violence against women and children. So let's go ahead and jump right in and get started. So let's talk about why this topic matters. Well, violence against families and intimate romantic relationships actually can affect multiple avenues of our development. And children specifically who experience abuse or even witness domestic violence or violence in their community may struggle with emotion regulation, trust, academic functioning, and even social relationships, future relationships, and how they engage with their peers. So ultimately, these effects do not end in childhood, instead, they continue into adolescence and into adulthood if support is not provided or therapy or support in any way is not provided. As far as human development, research does help us understand that these early experiences can shape our outcomes, and we will talk about a little bit about prevention. So ultimately, the impact of prevention does matter. So now we're going to talk about those childhood experiences that we can have that are actually quite adversive to our development and can impact our mental and physical health. So ACEs stands for Adversive Childhood Experiences. And on the screen, you'll see kind of a visual image of what those different ACEs can be. ACEs were studied by Kaiser Permanente many years ago. They did a longitudinal study to identify kind of what was some of the impacts of development over time. And they found that abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual, neglect, physical and emotional, and also household dysfunction such as mental illnesses, so a family member or parent having severe depression or anxiety, a relative or family member who is incarcerated for a long period of time, whether the mother was treated violently, a marriage dissolutions, and also substance abuse. They found that all these different things greatly impact the development and physical and mental health of individuals. So we're going to talk a little bit about how ACEs interact with us when we become adults. So as we think about the interaction between adversive childhood experiences and adult relationship, researchers evaluated and examined how violent childhood experiences actually relate to intimate partner violence within adulthood. So, from their research, they evaluated that findings actually showed that individuals with higher levels of adversive childhood experiences, basically saying they are experiencing maybe one or more or a few or more, actually had a greater risk of later victimization or perpetration of intimate partner violence. So ultimately, they found that there is a direct correlation between adversive childhood experiences and how we interact with our partners as adults. So this actually does help explain how trauma can influence relationships and also how childhood adversity can actually affect attachment styles, trust, coping strategies, emotion responses, and regulation. So, other words, trauma that we experience early on in life can actually resurface into our romantic relationships early on. And a lot of times we may ask ourselves, well, why don't these things stop? Where does the cycle end? That's always the never ending question of how can we make this cycle be different? But ultimately, intergenerational transmission does occur. Researchers did evaluate and find that in a 20-year longitudinal study on intergenerational transmission of partner violence, they actually found that children who witnessed violence between their parents were actually more likely to experience violence within their relationships as adults. So think about it. If we're a child, we're absorbing how our parents are interacting or our guardians are interacting with each other. If they're acting in a healthy manner towards each other, solving conflict, we're absorbing that like a sponge. And we ultimately are then going to model that when we become adults. Because when we register that information we take in as a child, we think that that is okay. That is how we are learning how to handle conflict. However, when we then transfer that to a relationship, it may model either in a healthy or unhealthy manner. So therefore, if we are viewing domestic violence or an unhealthy relationship, we're likely to perpetrate that when we are in a relationship. Therefore, the transmission over time. So ultimately, this also supports social learning theory, which actually suggests that Children learn a lot of their behavior by observing peers, by observing their family, their parents, their siblings. And if violence is actually normalized in the home, children are going to internalize harmful conflict patterns as okay. So this shows why healthy modeling in families is actually extremely important for future relationship development for our children. So this perspective of intergenerational transmission was continued to be examined among the pathways over time. Researchers additionally found that child maltreatment was associated with youth violence, and youth violence was predicted increased predictability of adult intimate partner violence. So for instance, if we then learn that behavior is okay of violence within the home, we may then utilize violence and then the academic setting per se, which then we may translate into our adult relationships. So I work with children who are, struggling. A lot of them are expelled. All of them are pretty much actually expelled, and a majority of them are expelled for fighting. What that tells me is when I get referred a student who has fought serious amounts of time, it gives me a window into what they may have witnessed in their childhood. They were modeled that fighting physically and getting verbal is okay. So then they're experiencing and kind of perpetrating those behaviors themselves, which then may lead me to think, I'm curious how their adult relationships may look. So it gives you kind of a window for myself as a therapist into what I may see and what the client may tell me that's happening in their home. So this is actually an example of like cascading developmental risk. So where one negative experience actually increases the likelihood of future problems and experiences. Rather than viewing like violence as like a one incident event, like it happened and then that's that, research actually encourages us to understand that violence as a part of the developmental process can actually build over time and be incredibly hurtful on individuals' development over time. So it's important that we talk about prevention. Prevention is a good way for us to stop the cycle or try to educate individuals on how they can stop the cycle. A lot of my work in my school-based setting is done about prevention and intervention, meaning we want to mitigate early on and support students now to help them break the cycle of their family patterns, how they communicate with other individuals, to hopefully make sure that they do not have a more negative path in the long run, which is incarceration or other things that may happen. So from research, this cycle of violence can actually be interrupted with protective factors. And these protective factors actually can include like safe caregiving relationships or trauma-informed counseling, parenting education, school support systems, and community intervention programs. A lot of funding that is provided to schools and community programs are based in prevention. So all the work that I do on the school has to be preventative. So by this, we can actually identify violence early and we can provide support that's tailored to that individual. And we can ultimately improve and hope to improve developmental outcomes, even if they're experiencing violence as it is. We can create a positive and healthy adult relationship with that individual. And this is important for both as we kind of go back to women and children. So ultimately, we did talk about a lot of different things. I'd like to leave you kind of with this discussion question to think about. So how can developmental science be used to better prevent violence across generations? So I want you to think about that a little bit. And I look forward to kind of wrapping up this course with you guys. I know you guys will be submitting your video presentations. You'll also be submitting your literature reviews as well, but don't hesitate to reach out via email for additional support, and I'll see you guys soon.